All right, well, we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Leadership Summit. We're glad that you could join us on this day of professional learning, and I hope that this has been a full day of learning for you, and that you will continue to look forward to what you have coming in this session, and then even another. This is a day that's meant to take family, school, community partnerships to the next level. My name is Jessica Hurt, and I will be this session's moderator. This is session 14, Ohio Department of Education's Leadership for Family Engagement. If you have any questions, concerns, or technical issues, go ahead and message me privately in the chat. To ensure that you get the most out of today, we're going to ask that all participants keep webcams turned off and microphones muted. If you have questions for the presenter, please use the chat feature, and either she will address them or I will pass them along at an appropriate time. As we have done for the rest of this day, you can even join this conversation on Twitter. Be sure to use the hashtag #ChartNewTerritories to share your thoughts. I am at this time really excited to introduce you to this session's speaker, my friend and a great working partner, Alexandra Nardo. Alexandra is the Family and Children Community Administrator in the Office of Whole Child Supports at the Ohio Department of Education. In this role, she oversees the department's family and community engagement initiatives, including working in partnership with the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center at The Ohio State University to facilitate the Family Engagement Center grant from the U.S. Department of Education. In addition to family engagement, Alexandra administers the federal education provisions for students in foster care. Prior to coming to the department, Alexandra was a teacher for 5 years in both Columbus, Ohio and Chicago, Illinois, teaching early childhood education, kindergarten, and first grade. She completed teacher certification coursework at Dominican University in Illinois and holds bachelor's degrees in political science and public affairs from the Ohio State University. Alexandra, thank you for being here with us. We look forward to hearing from you today.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you all, and welcome to everyone who is here today and joining the session on family engagement at the Ohio Department of Education. And so I think, Jessica, maybe the best way to facilitate, if I just say next slide, and we can go ahead to the introduction slide. So next slide one more time. Okay, awesome. So like Jessica said, I'm the Family and Children Community Administrator with the Office of Whole Child Supports. And then we could stay on the agenda slide. Thank you. So today, here's an agenda for our presentation session. First, I will ground us in Ohio's strategic plan for education, Each Child, Our Future. So as we heard in opening remarks from our State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Paulo Di Maria, we're going to talk a little bit about Ohio's strategic plan for education and how meeting the needs of the whole child and family engagement fits into that broader strategy. We're also going to briefly look at strategy 7 of Each Child, Our Future, supporting the whole child. And I will share with you the program areas that my office, the Office of Whole Child Supports, works to support. Next, we're going to focus in on Ohio's Whole Child Framework and specifically look at the family engagement components of the framework. The Office of Whole Child Supports was also able to work with the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center and the Family Advisory Council in November of 2020 to conduct some focus groups that provided our office with feedback directly from families, organization leaders, educators, and administrators about how we can better incorporate family voice and family engagement into the Whole Child Framework. We're beginning to develop some tools and resources around the Whole Child Framework, and that feedback was really essential to the development and forward nature of the framework. So I will be happy to share some of those reflections with you. And finally, we're going to wrap up. I will share a few other initiatives relative to family engagement and family supports that the department is working on. So at the end of the session, I will leave some time for questions, but like Jessica said, if there's anything that comes up, please feel free to drop it in the chat. I do have my chat pane open, so if I see it, I will address it as I'm going through the presentation. Also, there are a few links to resources that I am going to go ahead and drop in the chat as I am going, so feel free to take a look at those for supplementary materials and resources to what we're discussing today. So we will go ahead, and on the screen here is the graphic for Ohio's strategic plan for education, Each Child, Our Future. So Ohio's vision for education is that each child is challenged to discover and learn, prepared to pursue a fulfilling post-high school path, and empowered to become a resilient and lifelong learner. So in the blue there, you see the 3 core principles of the framework. They're the bedrock of the strategic plan. They include equity, partnerships, and quality schools. So these 3 principles are woven into all program areas, initiatives, and work at the Ohio Department of Education. And as you can also see in the plan, the whole child is at the center. The 4 learning domains that are in yellow off to the left support each child's physical, social, emotional, intellectual growth. And then the 3 core principles and the 10 priority strategies down there in green work together to support the whole child and enable that state level implementation of our vision and our one goal that is there in the maroon. So the Office of Whole Child Supports, which is where my position lives and where my team lives, as well as the Whole Child Framework, is really derivative of that strategy 7, so supporting the needs of the whole child. Family engagement is embedded not only into that component, but it's really woven throughout many of the other 10 key priority strategies. So including expanding high quality early learning and also developing literacy skills. So we know that family engagement leads to student success and opportunity for all. And we're going to talk a little bit more about where we see that happening in the Whole Child Framework. So next slide, please, Jessica. So before we discuss the framework, I want to talk a little bit about our office at the Ohio Department of Education. So the Office of Whole Child Supports at ODE focuses on all of those non-academic components of student success. So we support the wraparound services and programming that districts, community partners, and families engage with every day in a student's educational experience. So in addition to administering these programs, the Office of Whole Child Supports really believes in collaboration and synergy between our program areas. So very similar to the tracks that you could have participated in here today in our sessions, we know that when our program specialists, say in our mental or behavioral health care programs, work alongside of our family engagement staff or our PBIS staff or our social emotional learning staff, we can make the supports that we provide more coherent, relevant, and accessible to schools and districts. So really everything encapsulated in my office includes school climate and culture, social and emotional learning, supports for regular student attendance. We have PBIS specialists in my office, mental and behavioral health, school-based healthcare, the anti-harassment, intimidation, and bullying hotline, supports for school safety, our vulnerable youth program areas, including those programs specific to services for students experiencing homelessness, students in foster care, justice-involved youth, migrant and English learners, as well as military-connected youth. And then finally, we have our family and community engagement programs. So next slide, please, Jessica. So the guiding pillar of the Office of Whole Child Supports is Ohio's Whole Child Framework. So the Whole Child Framework was launched by the Ohio Department of Education in October of 2020. It was really informed by a year of stakeholder feedback from agencies, educators, administrators, community organizations, and education researchers at the table, families, and other partners here in Ohio. So very similar to the strategic plan, Ohio's Whole Child Framework also places the whole child at the center, with the district, school, family, and community supporting the needs of the whole child using that comprehensive approach. So a whole child approach really broadens the district and school focus beyond academics to include meeting students' social, emotional, and then physical and safety needs. So the Whole Child Framework is what's providing our educators, our staff, our community partners, our agencies with a blueprint to meet these whole child needs, which are foundational to a child's intellectual and social development. So the image on the left really zooms in on the 5 domains of the Whole Child Framework. So those domains are healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged. And then the image on the right really shows the entirety of the framework. Including in the blue areas, you see the components of whole child programming. And then inside of those blue components, you see a white ring around the center that highlights the systematic practices for learning and health. So the ring represents that to best coordinate resources, districts should coordinate policy, processes, and practices, practice cultural responsiveness, deliberately focus on equity, and then dedicate time and resources to structured continuous improvement. That's how that ring is kind of working in coordination with the components and then working to support those 5 tenant areas. So lastly, we see in the framework, in the yellow and maroon circles that are wrapped around the entirety of the framework, that partners represent the collective action needed to support each child and increase the likelihood of student success. So that we know addressing the needs of each child starts with engaging parents and caregivers, and therefore the family is represented in the maroon circle as the entire system of support that is wrapped around the whole child and wrapped around the framework. So we know that families and family engagement are critical to all areas of the framework. However, they're expressly named in both a component area, so family engagement is one of those blue components, and then also in the ring around the framework. So throughout the next two slides, I'm really going to zero in on both family engagement as a component, and then the maroon circle, families as a support system to the entirety of the framework. I do, however, see there are a couple questions in the chat, so I'm going to pause and see what that is. So we have one question that says, how does a school access the services offered through your whole child sports program? So that is a great question. In the next slide, I actually have our office's website. So I will go ahead and put that link to the chat in the chat at that time, and you will see all of the program specialists and additional staff and support we might have relative to those program areas. So those can be accessed through our website. Our office's work is always very inclusive of students with disabilities, but also at the Department of Education, we have an office specifically focused on students with disabilities, and that is called our Office for Exceptional Children. And then is there a link for the slide? I will go ahead also in the chat. The slides are posted to the session materials, so we can go ahead and find those there. And then I will go ahead and move us to, thank you for dropping that in the chat. I appreciate that. I will go ahead and move us to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about the two components of the whole child framework, community involvement and family engagement. So we know that these are regular aspects of each local school and district's activities and operations. So on the day-to-day, we have schools engaging in high-quality family engagement initiatives, and we also have schools regularly engaging with their communities. So these components provide the commitment and the blueprint for whole child family engagement. So we know, and I think the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center talks a lot about this research, that research shows us that folks understand what family engagement is when we use a rocket ship metaphor. So this rocket ship metaphor includes launching students to success using the type of collective effort it takes to launch a space shuttle. So that's the connection that we really want to make here in these two components. I'm going to pause for a second and I'm going to share. I really like this research, and I think it's something that I use a lot when I talk about family engagement. But it comes from the National Association for Family School Community Partnerships, how people best hear about the work of family engagement. So in addition to that we know students benefit from knowing they're surrounded by caring adults in school, at home, and within the community at large. So family engagement occurs when schools, families, and communities work together to best understand and align efforts that support the needs of all children. So we know that schools also do a lot relative to family engagement. So number one, they're creating systematic and multiple ways for families to engage and contribute to their child's education in school. Schools, students, and families are going to benefit when leaders and staff at the district or school coordinate information, resources, and services available from all of our community-based organizations. So we know schools are supporting families, and then they're also supporting the community, and those are working both outwardly the other ways. And number two, schools work together with families to design and build family engagement activities that enhance strong relationships, increasing that two-way communication between home and school, support learning at home, and involve families in decision-making and partnerships that are key to the school community. So one of the things I loved about today, we heard from a lot of the sessions, a lot of district schools and community leaders that are doing these very things. And we know that there are so many other districts and schools across Ohio who are engaged in this whole child work relative to family engagement every day. So in January, the department actually interviewed one of these local schools and districts, and also it was some folks from an ESC. So Gallia Local Schools and the Athens Meeks ESC. In addition to Hilliard City Schools, And these staff members shared both their mental health and family and community engagement whole child work as a model for schools and districts looking to establish similar partnerships relative to family engagement. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this example video in the chat. And I know sometimes when we're talking about a framework and we're talking about programs to implement within a framework and specific components to that framework, it's really helpful to see live examples and see folks doing this work in real time. And so I was really proud to hear and to learn from the work that's happening in Gallia. I think there are multiple partners here that are coming together to do the work of student academic readiness. So the video focused on specific partnerships relative to family engagement in the early learning space, as well as partnerships with their ESC and other community agencies. So that's a really great example. I also am seeing, though, coming through the chat that the page isn't active. So I apologize for that. At the end of the session, I will make sure that I get in there and find the link a different way so I can put that in. I apologize for that not working. And Jessica, you can go ahead and move to the next slide. Okay. So in addition to looking at the component areas of the whole child framework that are specific to family engagement, also we're going to talk a little bit about the two rings around the framework. So we believe that everyone, not just those in schools, shares the responsibility of preparing children and youth for a successful future. So partnerships transform the educational experience, and addressing the needs of each child starts with parents and caregivers and extend to schools and other community organizations that are supporting children. So the maroon ring shows that the relationship among families, communities, and schools is reciprocal. We know that everyone benefits when schools, families, and communities come together and put the whole child at the center of the work. When we describe families as partners, we mean that families have an active role in decision-making and feedback in schools and districts. So this can look like family representatives being sought out to sit on committees or teams, families being asked for feedback after a school or district-wide event, and generally families having input when decisions are being made about their child's educational experience. So another great example here in Ohio, we did some video work that was in the Gallia example that I tried to put there in the chat. But we got to sit down with some folks at the I Promise School in Akron, Ohio, and they really talked about the work that they're doing to support families as true partners in the educational experience. And I have a link to that video as well. And I actually think that this link might contain all of the videos that I am highlighting. So this link will also show you where you can find the Gallia example in the previous slide. Jessica, if you want to go ahead and move to the next slide, please. All right, so in this next slide, we're going to get to some of the resources and supporting materials for schools and districts who are implementing this work. So the Whole Child website was launched in October of 2020 and can really provide a robust but also very succinct overview of the Whole Child framework. So there's a lot of resources on here, including the framework language in its entirety. So I believe it's a 20-some page document, but we also have the graphic, kind of a summary of the framework. So if you're looking for the full understanding or you're looking for materials that can really help to just quickly sum up the Whole Child framework, you can find those on the website that I will put into the chat. And then in addition to our general Whole Child webpage, the department has also launched a Whole Child resources page where ODE has begun to store all the tools, resources, and information relating to those component areas of the Whole Child framework. So I'm going to take a minute. The first link I put in the chat will be our general Whole Child webpage. And then the second link I put in the chat will be our Whole Child resources page. And so this is really broken down into different program areas and component areas. I know someone asked a little bit earlier in the chat about more information of the Office of Whole Child Support's program areas. So those program areas and information can also be found on this web page that I am linking here. So the resources webpage is planning to be updated regularly, and more resources on the site will be forthcoming. So now that we've talked about the whole child framework, both in its entirety and then specifically looked at the components of family and community engagement, and then also the component of family as a support system in that maroon ring, I would like to share with you, and Jessica, you can go ahead to the next slide, some feedback that we heard from families during some focus groups that we conducted with the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center State Advisory Council. And so we conducted this feedback, these focus groups in November of 2020. And the purpose was twofold. So the first was really to provide a high-level overview, similar to what I just did, of the framework to a group of parents and families so that we can begin to develop a common language to use when discussing Ohio's whole child framework. The second goal was really to facilitate some focus groups that helped us at ODE understand how we can begin to develop resources and tools to support schools and districts in sharing information about whole child work with families, and then really begin to incorporate families as true partners in this whole child work. So on the next 3 slides, I'm going to share some feedback that we heard from families. The feedback is bucketed into 3 categories. So the first category of feedback is really how to share the whole child framework with families. So if you are a school or district staff member or a community agency, how would families like to hear the framework be shared? The second piece of feedback is who should be sharing about the whole child framework with families. And then number 3, how are some effective ways, or what are some effective strategies to present the whole child framework to families? So I think Jessica already has the first one up. Thank you for that. So the first bucket of feedback that we heard when we conducted these focus groups with the Ohio State Advisory Council is really ways to share with families about the whole child framework. And so there's a pretty comprehensive list of some suggestions that we heard from families, but some things that I did want to highlight. So families really talked about utilizing their school and district-based social media, especially in light of COVID-19 and kind of the remote nature of schools and learning. So we talked about Facebook groups and Twitter specifically. So looking at how the whole child framework can be shared at a district or school level through those outlets. They mentioned hosting a webinar information session for families about supporting the whole child, and then incorporating information about the whole child into school newsletters and publications so that families can begin getting that information about whole child framework, and really making that connection between where that work is already happening in schools and districts, or if schools are starting to launch some of this additional work, what those initiatives might look like in the school or district. Next slide, please. So the second bucket of feedback that we heard from families was around who should share about the whole child framework with families. So this question provided us with feedback that families really like to hear information directly from their child's teacher. We know that a teacher-student family relationship feels very close and personal, and families really hit on how beneficial it is for them to hear about school and district-wide initiatives from their child's teacher. So also highlighted in this group of feedback is the way that schools and districts can utilize parent organizations like the PTA and the PTO to truly be partners in some whole child work. And then the final slide, or the final feedback slide. Great, thank you. So the final bucket of feedback is around how to present this information about the whole child framework to families. So some of the highlights from this feedback included families really valuing smaller pieces of information rather than presenting it all at once, just to ensure that it's not overwhelming and they can really have time to understand the different component areas. They appreciate scenarios and examples being able to be provided about the tenets and the component areas, and then also for the information to be presented multiple times in multiple channels. So included in kind of those things I highlighted on the slide is an extensive list of some other feedback that we heard from families about how best to present whole child work to them. And so just kind of wrapping up these slides specifically about the whole child framework, whole child work, and the connections to family engagement, we know that this work is always critical, but especially critical as schools, districts, community partners, and those of us at agencies continue to support the response to COVID-19 and the relief work that's happening from that. So continuing to engage families in this work is really critical. So I'm going to pause there. And any questions specifically about the whole child framework? I don't see any in the chat. We have some time at the end, so I'm more than happy to address questions there too. But Jessica, you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So this next slide pivots us away a little bit from the whole child framework, but I also wanted to share 4 other initiatives or relative to family engagement that are being engaged with at the department. And so the first is through the statewide Family Engagement Center grant that the Ohio State University has in partnership with the Ohio Department of Education. Some of our state support team leaders, as well as school district staff and families, have been being trained in cohorts over the past few years in the National Network of Partnership Schools model for family engagement. We heard from a lot of districts that are implementing this model today, all of the wonderful work that's coming from it. So this training and implementation work is continuing to happen across their state. And I did just want to give a shout out to Dr. Boone and her team at OSU, who were just nationally recognized by Johns Hopkins with an award for their effective implementation of NNPS in schools and districts across Ohio. So still family engagement work relative to ODE that we're continue to be excited by happening alongside of our state support teams and other schools and districts. And so the second initiative that I wanted to talk through is as of September of 2021, the Ohio Department of Education launched a cross-agency family engagement team. So there are many offices and programs throughout the department that work on family engagement and also support families through their respective work. So through building an internal team to ODE, the department is really focused on aligning professionals in the agency who are doing family engagement so that we as professionals can begin to support one another in furthering the work of family engagement. So I wanted to share that we have representation on this team from our Office of Federal Programs, so those folks at the agency that are engaged in Title I family engagement, our Office of Learning and Instructional Strategies, our Office of Exceptional Children, specifically from our Parent Mentors program, and then also our Transitions programs, Office of Early Learning and School Readiness, specifically our Head Start program, my office, the Office of Whole Child Supports, so attendance, vulnerable youth programs, and supports for English learners and families. And then finally, our Office of Innovation and Improvement, specifically staff members from our school improvement team and our 21st century team for before and after school programs. So as you can see, we've heard throughout different sessions today about a lot of the different components and things that schools are doing that contribute to effective family engagement, and really trying to model bringing folks from each of those respective spaces at the department to discuss family engagement and to discuss how all of those things align to support family engagement. The third initiative I just wanted to provide a brief highlight on, so the Office for Exceptional Children, and then the Office for Early Learning and School Readiness, and the Office for Whole Child Supports, has been working together to use family feedback to redesign an interactive web page for students, for families of students with disabilities, so that families can better access information and supports from our department website and get more readily available and timely information regarding those supports for families. So that's something that is launching relatively soon. And then finally, the final project I wanted to highlight is in its earlier stages. So the Ohio Department of Education has a model state board policy on family engagement. So the Office of Whole Child Supports has been working in the research stage to really look at updating this policy, and it has begun to get feedback from families and other stakeholders on a draft of an update to this policy. So that's something that we continue to be excited about as a tool that we can use to talk about effective family engagement in our state. And Jessica, if you want to go ahead and transition to the next slide. I'm sorry, the slides have gone away on my screen. Is everybody seeing the ESC Family Community Partnerships Liaison slide?
No, we are not.
Oh, okay. I wonder if, okay, so there was a transition that happened on my end on the last one. I'm wondering if Jessica got kicked out of the meeting, because that is looking like what happened to my screen. Let me see here. Are you guys seeing any slides at all?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I think that is what happened. Let me see if I can. I'm on my last few slides. I'm happy to go ahead in the interim and share my screen with you. Thank you for your patience. I apologize for that. Okay, so I cannot share my screen, so I apologize. I don't have the capability to do that. I will go ahead and talk through what I was about to share, and I will drop a link in the chat that has some more information about the program. So if you are a visual person like me and need something to follow along with, you can follow along with this webpage. So the final project and initiative that I wanted to go ahead and share with you is that in response to COVID-19, the Office of Whole Child Supports, in partnership with our Educational Service Center, so our ESCs across Ohio, and then the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center, launched what we call the ESC Family and Community Partnerships Liaisons Grant. And so the three kind of buckets that I had on this slide here is that the first, this is really focused as a response to COVID-19. So COVID-19 relief funding was provided to each of Ohio's 51 ESCs to hire a family and community partnership liaison that could work with districts, schools, and community partners in their region to do a few things. So the first thing is to identify the students and families in need of wraparound community services and supports in light of COVID-19. And then the second thing is work to build the capacity of local school district staff to engage with the families identified through this process using effective family engagement strategies. And so the students and families that were targeted to be supported by this grant work include those students and families that meet the federal definition of vulnerable youth, including students experiencing homelessness, students in foster care, justice-involved youth, English learners and migrant youth, military-connected youth, and then students with disabilities. So the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center and the Center on Education, Training, and Employment at Ohio State have really worked to develop the research, resources, tools, and communities of practice to support the ESC Family and Community Partnership Liaisons. So the liaisons first disseminated a needs assessment to school staff, community organizations, and other people in their region to identify the highest need priority area population. And they are now either building or joining an already existing local coalition of professionals kind of around that need area to address needs of students and families. So upon gathering data from the ESC liaisons about the students and families that they are focused on supporting, approximately 1/3 of the liaisons are focusing on services and supports for students and families experiencing homelessness. 1/3 are focusing on justice-involved or youth in foster care, and then 1/3 focusing on supports for students with disabilities. And so this has been a project that over the past couple months, I've had a chance to really work closely with and really work closely with the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center on, and most importantly, closely with the liaisons. And this has been really awesome work to see happen. I think the folks that are in these roles are super passionate and they are doing awesome things for families and students and really helping districts connect families to resources in light of what's out there because of COVID-19. So this has been really awesome work and work that I'm super proud to see happening and super proud to see continue. And so finally, Jessica, I saw you join us back. You can go ahead to the next slide. Whoops, and I'm sorry, I had one more slide in there. I just wanted to provide some wrap up and recap. I know that we talked about a lot today, but just to hit kind of 3 bullet points that wrap us up. The first is I really wanted to share with you a little bit about the Office of Whole Child Supports and how we at the department are supporting schools, districts, community partners, families, and students in providing wraparound supports and services. So there were a couple times a link in the chat to program areas and thus program staff in those areas. Please reach out should we be able to make those connections for you all. The second is really to talk about Ohio's Whole Child Framework and how that is really supporting family engagement and how family engagement is a central component of the framework. And then finally, I wanted to share a little bit more about what's happening at ODE to align family engagement work and also continue to support the field through information, training, and connections relative to family engagement. And so I see now that the slides are back up and my contact information is here. I always like to end my presentations by saying my favorite thing about doing this work is really getting to connect with schools and districts and other professionals in the field and to hear and see how this work around frameworks and policy is really being implemented in the field. And so I always love to hear stories and love to hear anecdotes of what's happening in the field. And so I always welcome you. If there's anything that you would ever like to share, be connected with, you think the department could elevate great work that's happening that you are a part of or you are seeing, please feel free to send me an email or provide me a phone call. I always love to share with other colleagues and leadership of the department the awesome work that's happening in family engagement in our schools, districts, and communities. So my inbox is open, and thank you all for your time today. Apologies for the slight technical difficulties, but I would like to open up to any questions or feedback. Thank you.
I agree with that, Keisha. It was a fantastic presentation, even for the moments that I had some catastrophic failures over here. But I imagine that Alexandra continued on like the professional that she is, and you all were able to follow along with her. I will remind you, and I know it kind of went out in the chat earlier, the slides, the full slide deck, so that you can see all that you might have missed in my absence, is available on the Summit website. And so that is the same one that you've been using to access all of your sessions and whatnot, but there will be session materials. This presentation will be available as well on that Summit website once recordings are posted and they are edited and finished. But this is has been a really good, I think, presentation. It is important to understand the work of really the agency that supports the work that each of you are doing on the ground. I think it's very important to know that it's more than just a bunch of people sitting around in a room making decisions for schools. Instead, this has been a process that has included many of the actual stakeholders and the people and individuals affected, families affected, and the students who are affected by these policies. And so, as Alexandra has really laid out well for us, this whole child framework is really vital to each student, no matter who or where they are. So if there are no more questions, and I know that Alexandra is also very responsive to questions, and she is not kidding when she says she loves to hear these stories. But just thank you, Alexandra, for sharing us. You're already getting thank yous in the chat, and I know that there are others who likely very much enjoyed this session. You're going to get out a little bit early from this one, so the next session won't start until 2:15. If this, however, is your final session of the day, there is a survey for you to fill out. We ask that you only take it once. So if you've already taken it, then don't do it again. If you haven't, then go ahead if you're done. And please remember to keep the conversation going. and visit the Summit webpage if you need more information about today's event. Thank you, everyone, and talk to you later.
Thank you all.